Ever since childhood, every Jewish boy has always wondered what those 39 lashes must feel like. And knowing full well he never wanted to find out by experience. Somewhere he heard the sound of a box being opened. Something fell to the floor. Some voices, one after another, vying for the whip. A desire to be the one who beats on Saul first. A scathing rebuke, charge after charge against him. There's a moment of pause. Paul braces. That is far more painful than he ever imagined. Some men have died being whipped again and again. The manager of the synagogue moves. Some of the whip lashes now go to his side, and then to his other side, and now others come down on his shoulders and are pulled hard downward. Others on his lower back, and then again and again between the shoulders. He can feel the skin beginning to give way. He collapses. The beatings continue. Lash after lash, he wakes. On it goes. There must have surely been 39 by now. On the verge of screaming and begging for mercy, it all stops. He's cut down flat claps to the floor, but tender and loving hands catch him. There's a great deal of crying. He's lifted out bodily and carried somewhere he does not know. He feels cool water, warm water, cool water, feels cloth. When they're taking him out of the synagogue, he heard the word, clean up the blood. He knew that he was bleeding. And he remembered words that he had heard quoted of Jesus. They're going to throw you out of the synagogue. And if they kill you, they will believe that they have done God a favor. And he is pleased with having killed one who would assault the very religion of God. An hour, 2, 3, and a kind voice says, Saul, infection, it will come unless Saul asks for something to be put in his mouth. Brothers' hands hold him on the right side and the left side, some his feet, another braces his neck with a strong hand. And now the true pain begins. Out of love, someone begins pouring salt all into his wounds. For the infection cannot live where there is salt. He screams and screams and screams again. There are murmurs of prayer. He hears some crying. he murmurs one word again and again. Lord, Lord, Lord. A few days later, the salt is replaced by honey, for it appears that infection cannot grow where there is honey, either, if it be pure. He stays there for several weeks. And then he hears the news. It is October, and the new emperor, not yet an emperor for a year, as running some raging fever. It seems to have drawn him totally incoherent, with screams of madness, delusion, and all the empire, including the Jews, turn to praying for him. You will one day say to them, you have prayed for me, but you have not prayed to me. And so it comes about in December that little by little he begins to recover. But the man who comes out of the fever is not the young man who went into it. This is a diabolical obsessing of the human soul. At this moment, in the year 38, is leased upon this earth the most wicked, cruel, most evil, savage, barbaric, madman of a leader that the world will ever know. The one who rules over men and lands. There has never been nor ever will be anyone as depraved and as imaginative in his depravity, or sick in his heart or his mind, as is this man whose name is Gaius Caligula. If you ever want to find out just how depraved was this man, came Gaius Caligulus, you will never find anyone to tell you. You'll have to read about it. Some things can be said and are said, but some of it no man would ever tell. Perhaps to print, but never to speak. It was beyond the imagination of men to conceive in his depravity. Two things he did immediately after he became well, several, one was to have killed anyone whom he suspected of trying to take advantage of him while he was in that fever for 2 months. He was walking along with a friend of his who asked his friend, which is greatest, Apollos or Gaius? Because the man hesitated for just a second. The man was tortured to death. Gaius had just figured out that different parts of the body in pain will elicit different kinds of sound, a deep moan, a high shrill, a soprano sound. He taught his soldiers to learn to play music in the tortured screams of a man. What happened to Paul after the beating and the healing? He did the same thing every other man has ever done who's gone through a great religious change in his life. Moses, from a Pharaoh's son to a wilderness for the length of a lifetime. Jesus, going out into the wilderness to be alone after he was baptized. And Paul and so many others went out into the wilderness to be alone. Not a single person knew him by face who had not met him before when he left Damascus and went out into Arabia. He was there for over 2 years, living not too far from Petra, attending a very small, obscure synagogue, a gathering of a small group of Jews, but who had the largest port of a Torah that he could have read to him every Saturday or during the week. No man read a Torah except the manager of the synagogue. And so it was that the Pharisee drained out of Paul his interpretation of the Torah. All left him. His reading of the scripture came into him a totally different dimension. The creation took upon him a whole new meaning. On every turn of the scroll, it was Christ, and it was Christ, and it was Christ. At the end of 2 years, and Paul had missed a large part of some of the great tragedies of the Roman Empire. Gaius had taken over as emperor by the end of the year 4039. In the point when Rome was richer in money than at any other time in its history before or after, in those 2 short years, Gaius had bankrupted the empire. His way of securing money now beyond taxes was to turn one wing of the Palace of Rome into a brothel, to have men come and forced to will to him personally their estate, only to be killed shortly thereafter. A 1-mile-long lake in northern Italy became the home of 2 of the most expensive, luxurious gorges the world has ever known. A large part of the money of an empire went to building those 2 gorges for Gaius. He could be alone. They sailed 1 mile. There was so much he now faced which he had never seen before. He arrived back in Damascus, this time no longer a friend of the Jewish faith, but now a hated and despised man through the eyes of all Hebrews. who were not followers of the way, and thus it would remain for the rest of his life. The world is different now. Everyone fears Gaius. He has killed his own grandmother. He publicly selects the wives of senators, takes at banquets and takes one of them off to another room and comes back and describes in detail the affair and gives an evaluation of how well she did. There is hate that is growing, but there is nothing to compare with one above all else. At first, no one took him serious, and yet he was determined. Gaius does not like Jewish people. They do not pray to him. He does not understand one God. But he does know that there is a temple with a very secret building in it called the Holy of Holies, where God is to dwell. He orders that a statue be placed in the Holy of Holies, made out of solid gold, because he is the only God there is at this time. Gaius' entire family and all others involved reject the idea. He is more determined than ever. Things are also growing very desperate for the Jews in Alexandria, when a host of them were rounded up, put into the stadium, and forced to eat pork, a shame for any Jew. Agrippa, a name of a man who only begins to emerge, is a Jewish grandfather of Herod the Great, born in 10 BC. He's in prison at the time that Tiberius dies because of deception, deceit, debt, and even a twisted testimony given against him that he had threatened the life of Tiberius. But during the time that he was in Rome and at Capri, his closest friend was Gaius. His second closest friend was a crippled descendant of Julius and Augustus Caesar, whose name was Claudius. It was at the time that Gaius took the throne that he released Agrippa from prison and gave him a golden key, indicating that he had unlocked the door to the cell of Agrippa. Pretty soon, Agrippa had become the governor of a small part of a much divided up Israel. He did everything in his pleading to help to try to get Gaius to understand he cannot put a gold statue in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. It would call for instant rebellion, war, and death. Gaius seems to be utterly unmoved by anyone concerning this. All of this is going on when Paul comes back to Damascus. He goes in a new man, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and always referring to the gentleman named Stephen. Once more he speaks. Once more he's tied. Once more he's beaten. Someday his back will not only be scars upon scars, but will be completely calloused. covered with calluses from his beatings. He decides after that he will go and for the first time see Peter. But there is a problem, and that is no one knows where Peter stays. Neither does anyone know where John stays, for both of these men had been arrested. The 12 had been arrested, and Peter and John were under the penalty, an informal penalty of death if anyone ever found them. So he goes to Jerusalem. He does not meet the church. He finds one man who will listen to him, and that one man decides that Peter should meet the man. In order to do this, Peter will have to disclose the place where he's hidden. Paul is talking to Barnabas. Barnabas decides that he's going to have Paul meet Peter. And at that moment, it is Barnabas who says, "Come, I will show you This is disc number 7. We'll continue on there. Suddenly, Barnabas reached down to the corner of the room and lifted a door. He motioned for Paul to follow him. Down a ladder, down into a deep hole that had been cut out of the ground, and then a tunnel. So narrow you had sometimes to walk sideways. Barnabas with a candle leading the way. Obviously, it passed over several streets and made several turns. Where they led, they did not know. You can even hear the dogs barking in the streets of Jerusalem over their head. They came to the very end, and there was a ladder leading up to another door on then the floor. Barnabas signaled to Paul to go up first. He went up, tapped on the door. The door opened, and there in the dark, Paul saw a hand reach down. Paul grabbed it. The two hands clasped one another. A very strong arm lifted Paul up to another building, a house somewhere in Jerusalem, without windows and without doors. It was Simon Peter. They greeted, they hugged, then John, then the brother of Jesus. Lights had been lit. They tell me you look like Jesus. Look, Peter broke in. The similarity is truly remarkable. Then you must look like James answered, I look a great deal like my mother. So they shared, they talked. Finally, hours upon hours, Paul told his story, while Barnabas sat and listened. The part about his being called to the Gentiles met a skeptical look on the face of James and John and Peter. Finally, John said something to Peter. Peter turned to Paul. We believe that you are a follower of Christ, but you have spoken of 2 beatings. I have never heard of a Jewish man beaten in a synagogue on 2 occasions, not the same synagogue. Do you mind? Paul said, of course, I understand. I am as amazed that one such as me is now a follower of Christ as you are. Paul stood, turned, and dropped his shirt. James, John, Peter, and Barnabas, 4 men instantly. One let out a long whistle, another a groan, another cried out, oh no. Peter walked over and laid his hand on the back of Paul of Tarsus and made this statement: the scars, the whip marks, so similar to our Lord. What Paul did not know was that before he would finish the fight, he would have been 4, 5 times beaten with the Jewish whip, and there would be others. Most of the evening, the next day, and the entire 2 weeks was mostly John telling his story of Pentecost and Jesus' words being quoted to Paul over and again. At no time did anyone ask Paul a single question about what he believed, nor did he ever ask Peter, nor John, nor James. He did leave at the end of that 2 weeks with a strong impression that James was still living in the era of the laws of Moses, that Peter had pulled free of that except for the Gentiles. He was totally Jewish in his vision of salvation. Paul wasn't troubled, but he still wondered. Those words, I will send you to the Gentiles. I will send you to the Gentiles, and you will suffer. You will suffer for me. That suffering would be from whom, he wondered. From the Gentiles? Perhaps Jews too? Surely not. Or the world, the governments and principalities of this day. He simply did not know. There is one thing I want to do while I am here. I want to come the first possible moment to the Freeman's Synagogue, the Libertine Synagogue. Oh, we never go there, said James. Peter nodded. I understand. You do not grow up in a Greek world. Another voice. I am often there. It was Barnabas. Or I attend there from time to time. I believe that we have heard your story referred to many times in that synagogue. And most of the people have heard of your conversion, but not a one of them believes it. Then I will change that, said Paul, for I intend to finish a message, a testimony, said Paul. The interrupted message. I'll be going there tomorrow, if tomorrow is open, and I will be giving them full assurance that I belong to the Lord above all else. It is He to whom I belong. So after 2 weeks, the 4 men gave each one of them a hug and the Christian embrace. And that is a kiss on each cheek, something that had been won by the Christians in their first years there in Jerusalem. The last words Peter said to Paul is, I do not understand these words from God, that you would be sent to the Gentiles. We only know Jewish salvation. Perhaps there's something out there that will change all that. Paul paused and said, there must be. Peter, I heard those words, I will go to the Gentiles, and I will take Christ to the Gentiles. And Peter added, and you will suffer greatly if you do. You might even encounter the discouragement from words, the mouth of those who are followers of the way. Paul dismissed himself and went back to the home of Andromeda. He knocked on the door. There was a moment of fear and then a hug. We have heard that you are now a follower of the Lord. Does that mean that you have abated your anger toward me and toward my wife? Paul clasped his hands over his chest. You cannot possibly know how enraged I was when I came in from this moment, this day, this propitious day, when Gamaliel was speaking of the coming of the Messiah and preparing us for the possibility that when he came, he might not be a militant. And then to come home and hear that you were in Christ. It was the rage that I carried with me that day to the Freemans, to the Libertine Synagogue. It was part of that rage that caused me to give consent to his death and to go from house to house, dragging men and women and children to the prison. There was a long time of sharing and crying, asking for forgiveness and receiving it. And then Paul asked, is there room underneath the staircase? And Andromeda said, Paul, we prayed for you, and as hard as it was for us to conceive with our minds, we never doubted one day you would know him. The next day, Paul made his way to the Libertine synagogue, circular on three sides, filled with chairs, the other side holding a box containing whatever portions of the Torah that they may have managed to purchase at exorbitant cost. Paul spoke. Paul debated. He came back the next day again. Each day the crowds grew larger. And finally, someone whispered to him after the meeting, "Don't go out the door, not yet. Come through the back way." "You're a believer?" "I am one of the followers of the way. Barnabas asked me to be here every day that you are here." He also attended in one of the meetings, but you were not aware of it. He stayed out of sight. The man really does believe in you, Paul. "I am honored," said Paul. "You'll have to leave by the back door. We know that there is a plot to kill you on the morrow when you step into the synagogue." "For me? A plot?" "No, you speak of Stephen." No, Paul. Now it is you. And I have brought you to hide you because it could happen as early as today. We have to get you out of Jerusalem just as quick as possible. We wait for dark. And so Paul stayed in the home of a Christian family he never knew. And about midnight that night, with horses and a group of Christians who had been planted all along the road to Caesarea to make sure that he was safe as he traveled. They never saw his face. His face was hooded, but they had heard this one who once persecuted the church now lives for him. 2 days in hiding, and then a ship headed due north. It would stop at Rain, at Sidon, and Babel, and bring him finally back to his home in Tarsus. It was in 27 that Jesus Christ began his ministry. It was in 37 that Tiberius died and was replaced by Gaius. It was also now in the year 40 AD that Paul was returning home. The city of Jerusalem was too dangerous a place for this new follower of the way. And so it was. And though he had traveled in his trade to Syria and other parts of Cilicia, he eventually ended up back in his own home city, waiting for God. After 2-3 years in the desert, a second beating in Damascus, 14 days with Peter and John and James, the brother of Jesus, not the other James, who was dead, and a few days of visiting and debating and sharing his testimony. All Paul had to show for it was the fact that he had finished that message that Stephen had begun The last words that were spoken were of those who hardened their hearts against the Lord. It was there that Paul continued the message and fervently begged men and women to turn from their present ways and do as he did, and then gave his testimony of having met Jesus on the Damascus road. It is a message that he would bring over and over again, repeating the message of Stephen and then ending with his own incredible story. So it was that Paul passed away his time right there in his own hometown. It never occurred to him that there would be other things happening in Israel, and then something happening in hated Antioch, Syria. Nor could he have possibly imagined that one day, unceremoniously, someone would open the door to the house where he lived. Next will be number 9 as the story continues. The two men hugged one another and began talking furiously. Finally, Barnabas said to Paul, "First of all, it took a long time to find you here. You have not made yourself a reputation here as I might have expected." And Paul answered, "I am waiting to go to the Gentiles." And Barnabas shook his head and said, "Yes, and you cannot believe what I'm about to tell you. Peter has baptized Gentiles." Paul stood back in wonder. "Did you say Peter, the man who is so utterly committed to it being Jews only?" "Exactly that. He was in Joppa, had been called over to Caesarea by the sea, and was speaking to a group of people who were friends of Cornelius, a very devout Roman soldier. A Roman soldier. Yes, and as he preached to them, and God had shown him that he should, the Holy Spirit fell upon them. They were at once converted and spoke in other languages, exactly like on the day of Pentecost. And Peter baptized them right there in the presence of other Jews who were just as astonished as Peter, and even more so when he baptized them. The church in Jerusalem was furious. The 11 apostles were waiting for him when he arrived back in Jerusalem. They were furious. And then Peter told the story of a dream he had something to do about a sheet coming down from heaven filled with all kinds of unclean animals. And God spoke and said, "Eat." And in the dream, Peter said, "Lord, I can't eat any of this food. It's unclean, and I've never eaten unclean food." Quite a statement for a fisherman. And then God said, "Do not turn down that which I have called clean." And that was just a few moments before visitors came, and Peter went to Caesarea and spoke to Cornelius and his people. Now, that's not all that's happened. Peter said, I think I'd better sit down before I hear any more of this. Eyes were filled with tears, finally, to the Gentiles. It is the year 41, and Paul had been saved in the year 37. That was 5 years of waiting. How is your back? Asked Barnabas. Fine. Waiting for another one if necessary. And for the two men then talked for a while about what had happened from the time in 37 when Tiberius had died and the world was plunged into the leadership of a man gone stark, raving. Years of unbelievable horror, of insanities, some things so wicked, unmentionable, and some things so typical of a madman that they had to be laughed at. But it was that as Gaius Caligulus was leaving a theater and taking an underground hall back to the palace, that two men, one of them being Macro, whom he had assaulted so many times, it was his last insult. He and several other men put themselves upon Gaius. And as it was said, it was on that day that Gaius found out he was not at all the son of Zeus, nor was he a god. He died. Now, what was fascinating about all of this, said Barnabas, was Agrippa. Now, Agrippa is not the son of Herod. He's the grandson and born of a Jewish woman. He's Jewish. And Tiberius had thrown him in prison. And then when Gaius Caligulus became emperor, he had been a close friend, a childhood friend of Agrippa, for Agrippa, who had been born long before that, grew up with both Gaius and also Claudius. And the first thing that Gaius ever did was to set Agrippa free. Now, in this moment, when Caligula was dead, Gaius Caligula dead, and the world of Rome was in carnage, Agrippa went to the soldiers and said to them, you must choose Claudius as emperor. And guards stood with him, backed him, obeyed him, though he was nothing more than a friend of Gaius Caligulus. They went to Cornelius, the centurions, the guards, and they announced to the Senate, this is who they want to be emperor. And suddenly, Agrippa found himself once more the closest friend of an emperor. It had been Agrippa who had kept Gaius Caligulus from putting that golden statue in the Holy of Holies, which would have surely caused the death of almost all the Jews, for they would have fought, no matter who it was who came, to prevent that from happening. One of the Jewish leaders had said, "It is better that we, the Jewish race, die and not be one left upon this earth than the golden statue of Gaius Caligulus be erected in the Holy of Holies." It was Agrippa who had actually talked Gaius Caligulus out of that one great determination of his own to have that golden statue in Jerusalem. And even after his death, it was found that though he had given his word to Agrippa, he would not do what he had planned. He had nonetheless sent word to Egypt that he would soon be coming to Egypt and that statue would be molded and it would be delivered at Caesarea by the sea, and it would be taken and placed in the temple. So it is now that Agrippa, the grandson of Herod, has found himself in good stead with the emperor Gaius Caligulus, and now the closest friend of Claudius. It is at this time that Agrippa proves that his uncle and his sister, Herodias and Antipas Herod, were plotting against the emperor, and Claudius puts Agrippa in charge of Galilee. All of this, and now it is the year 41. And what has happened during these years has ripped the empire apart financially. Claudius is now desperately trying to put his empire back on a stable footing. Peter has baptized a Gentile, and then Barnabas absolutely sends Paul off his feet. Paul, do you remember the name of a man whose name was Simon of Cyrene? Paul answers, yes, I've heard the tale. He is one of the Cyrenians who actually bore the cross of Jesus Christ. Well, he moved to permanently be in Jerusalem. You know, when the persecution came under you, Paul, he moved out into the cities, and he and some others decided to go on out and preach the gospel, and one of them suggested that they preach the gospel in Antioch. Paul dropped his head into his hand. I wouldn't go to that place for anywhere in the world. I don't care, gospel or not. Paul, you'd better hold that for a moment. Simon of Cyrene and some other brothers preached the gospel in the synagogue there. Many of the Jews turned to the Lord, and some of the Gentiles insisted on becoming followers of Jesus Christ. They did not know what to do, but they came by the dozens and then the hundreds. By now, Paul, the second largest gathering of God's people in all the world, is in Antioch, Syria. Oh, no. Oh, no. That's the middle of the story, Paul. Peter was asked to come up there. Simon of Cyrene and others begged Peter to come. It seems as though a church is not officially recognized if Peter hasn't come. Said Paul. That's a tradition of man. Well, that may be, but it's also true that Peter felt he was too busy to go to Antioch. Thought Paul. Peter called me, Barnabas, and said, go to Antioch, find out what's going on, and report back to me. And so I did. Paul answered, when did you do this? Just a few weeks ago. What? Just a few weeks ago? Yes. Now, what are you doing here? Did you not tell me on the day I met you that you had been sent by God? Yes, by the Lord Jesus Christ, to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. It's true. Well, I went to Antioch, Paul, and what I saw is not like anything anyone in this world has ever seen. And furthermore, Paul, it's nicer, it's more fun, it's more beautiful, more full of grace, and void of all of our Jewish traditions. Who said, Paul, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Now, what are you doing here? I'm not going to report back to Peter right yet. I wanted to come up and talk to you. Would you come with me to Antioch, to the Gentile church, the first and only one? It's like taking a bath in water that's simultaneously cold and hot. I wouldn't want to go to Antioch for anything in the world. Don't you know that generations ago, it was the Syrians, and Antioch is their capital, drove my people out to this very city of Tarsus. Paul, you got to go see these people. There are only a handful of Jews there in Whoa. Did you say only a handful of Jews? Are you telling me that the overwhelming number of them are Gentiles? Yes, Paul. But more than that, the Antioch Gentiles lead the church. It's a Gentile church. And I want you to go with me. I want you to at least look. Paul paused for a moment, shook his head. No, didn't say a word, just kept shaking his head. No. Barnabas was crestfallen. On and on, he shook his head. The more Barnabas looked at that, it was not so much a no as it was a way of expressing wonder and awe. And Paul said, it's less than 300 miles, is it not? That is true. I'll need 2 days to close what I'm doing here and turn this work back over to my family and to my sister. In the meantime, you can help me pack. And so it was that the two men, full of excitement and glee, headed out for Antioch City, Syria, in about the year 44 AD. Late 43 or perhaps early 44. for, and you cannot believe what Paul saw with his very eyes, nor could you possibly know where you might be spending the night, nor could he possibly dream of what Agrippa would be doing, nor what he would be doing. But the stun that fell upon Paul when he saw a gathering in Antioch was one of the great changing moments of his life. And so they entered the city of Antioch. Granite streets, north and south, east and west, put there, polished stone by Herod the Great. A great colonnade on both the east and west side, where under each colonnade was a marketplace, belying and hiding the poverty behind those colonnades. Paul walked into his first meeting, and the very first thing he noticed was, and we'll take up next time.
Click here to watch another spiritually rich message from Gene Edwards and continue your journey into the depths of Christ.